Welcome to another edition of Critical Conversations. We are in Cambridge, Massachusetts with Beena Sarwar, a leading Pakistani human rights activist, artist, journalist, and editor. Beena is an outspoken advocate for minority rights in Pakistan and has been at the forefront of peace initiatives between India and Pakistan. Today we shall speak to her about militancy, the role of civil society, and the Pakistani diaspora in combating terrorism in the country. Beena, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Beena, over the past decade, more than 50,000 Pakistanis have been killed in terrorist violence. And yet, the December 16th attack on the school in Peshawar, which killed 145 children and teachers, seemed to be more of a turning point for public opinion about terrorism, and also in the way it galvanized civil society groups in Pakistan and the Pakistani diaspora. You've been involved with and participated in a number of protests and vigils that have taken place since the attack. Please tell us a little bit about the nature of those protests and what you feel the organizers hope to achieve.
So, as you said, Peshawar was a tipping point, or we hope it was a tipping point. Mm-hmm. But what we see is that the outrage about Peshawar, which did translate into, as you said, these protests, these vigils, and they became global because people in the United States and in England and in other places, Pakistanis, the diaspora, took up the cause and said, we want to speak out and we want to support those who are on the ground protesting in Pakistan. But yet we saw that very quickly the confusion began again in the mainstream narrative. So then, there were people saying that, India's involved in that, or whatever, things like that. So that the focus began to shift from the actual attack to all kinds of other, things that obfuscated the issue. And then you had, we're having these vigils, so it's like there's the Peshawar attack happened December 16th, and so on the 16th of every month, or around the 16th of every month, we've been having these vigils, and I've been writing about them. But in between every vigil, there's one huge horrendous attack still happening. And what happened what's happening is, and that's the other part of the confusion in the narrative, is that you have the attacks on the Shia Imam Baras, the Shia mosques, the Shia Muslim mosques. You have other people, other non-mainstream Muslims being attacked. So Peshawar galvanized everybody because there were children, there were teachers. It was just really too barbaric for words. And then it seemed that if those same people are attacking Shia mosques, Shia Imam Baras, there isn't that level of outrage. If they attack an Ahmadi mosque, there isn't that level of outrage. If a Hindu trader is kidnapped and killed, there isn't that level of outrage. So there is selective outrage, and part of that is because of this confusion, this myth that Pakistan has perpetuated of the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. That the good Taliban are those, quote unquote good Taliban, are those that further Pakistan's strategic interests in the region with regards to India, with Afghanistan.
And these would be the Afghan Taliban, perhaps?
No, these are Pakistan's very own homegrown militants that come directly out of the trajectory that began with the Afghan war, the first Afghan war, when the USSR, then Soviet Union, went into Afghanistan, and Pakistan became the frontline state against communism, against that. And the United States, the CIA, created this, made it into an international jihad, which a so-called holy war, which, as the late Dr. Iqbal Ahmad has said, didn't exist for 4,000 years before that. As a concept. You had that was a national war of liberation of Afghanistan, which was deliberately made into a holy war of Islam, falsely, which drew people from around the world, Muslims. It perpetuated that idea of the Ummah, of the Muslim, brotherhood, of the global thing. And that is it. So what we're seeing directly is that trajectory which has been taken forward and that has grown. So when you create a monster, then you don't have a control of how it grows and develops, and that's what has happened in this case.
And so then who are the bad Taliban?
In terms of Pakistan, as far as Pakistan is concerned, they are those who do things like the attack on the Peshawar school, who attack state institutions, who attack the police academy or the naval bases, or the who actually carry out attacks within Pakistan on state institutions, right? What they might be realizing now, hopefully, I think they might be. This is maybe me just being very, very optimistic, but they might be realizing now that all these groups are aligned. They are ideologically aligned. They have a common goal, which is to create a Muslim state, quote unquote, in their words, which would be like a worse version of Saudi Arabia. That's already there. We had what's happening in Saudi Arabia. The Taliban do that in Afghanistan when they were in power, beheading people, flogging people, stoning women to death, which Saudi Arabia doesn't do the stoning part, but and that law is in Pakistan statute books. It was inserted, as you know, by a dictator, by a military dictator, who was propped up by the United States to further that war in Afghanistan. So it's all part of that thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole range of militant groups in Pakistan, right? So they're like, you sort of differentiated between the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. They're those who are focused entirely on the war in Afghanistan. And by those, I meant the Afghan Taliban, who are sort of, in Pakistani territory, but are fighting and are sort of focused on coalition forces in Afghanistan. Then we have our sectarian outfits, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi and the others, who are sort of very sectarian in nature and target Shia groups and Ahmadi groups, etc. Then we also have the anti-India groups. So what do you think is the role of civil society in trying to sort of change the narrative about each of these groups?
So I think that the thing to realize is that these are not separate groups. The groups that have been allowed to function to needle India or to create a so-called strategic depth in Afghanistan, those are also the groups that are attacking the Shia Imambaras and the Ahmadi mosques and all of that. They're the same people. It's kind of like, because the ideology, their ideology, the ideology of all of these groups, ranging from this so-called Islamic State in Iraq to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, they all of them, what they share is a very sort of warped interpretation of Islam. So I'm not going to say they are not Muslims, because that is the kind of thing that they do. They term people not Muslim. That is called takfiri, to divide, the takfiri thinking. I'm not saying that they are not Muslims, as a lot of people say, well, they are not Muslims. They call themselves Muslim. They're killing in the name of the Prophet of Islam, and they're killing in the name of Islam. I'm not going to say they're not Muslim, but I'm going to say that they have a very warped interpretation of Islam. And that warped interpretation stems from Saudi Arabia. That's something that you don't hear in this country, because Saudi Arabia is where the oil comes from. And so the United States and a lot of other countries, they turn a blind eye to the injustices in Saudi Arabia. There was an uproar over how the Taliban treated women in Afghanistan, which is no different than how Saudi women were being treated at that time. So that warped interpretation of Islam, that very narrow thing, according to which Shias are not Muslims, Ahmadis are not Muslims, and a range. I mean, everybody who doesn't follow their narrow interpretation, they say is not Muslim. And even that would be okay, except that they think it is okay to kill those people, because their ideology is that if you say you are a Muslim and you are actually not, then you are an apostate, and apostates should be killed.
Right.
Is their logic.
Right.
Or illogic, whatever.
Yeah. And so we mentioned these groups, and a lot of them emerged out of the Afghan War in the 1980s. And some other of these, I mean, the Taliban, like the Pakistani Taliban, sort of, emerged in the 1990s as well. But you spoke about the attacks on the Shia Imambaras, on the Shia places of worship, and most recently the twin attacks on the churches in Yohanabad in Lahore, and the Taliban again claimed responsibility for that attack. But some would claim that religious intolerance in Pakistan predates the Taliban, and was there even before the emergence of all of these militant groups. So even before it became violent, there was this pervasive sense of religious intolerance towards minority groups and sectarian groups. And what do you think, one, do you agree with that? And two, again, what do you think the role of civil society should be in sort of changing that societal mindset that perpetuates that?
Yeah, so you asked me that question before also, and I didn't answer it. So I'll come to that first. What people need to do. So civil society, I'm not very comfortable with that term, because civil society, what does it mean? There are many people in civil society who have very different opinions, who think that it's okay that that they think that Malala was an agent of the West, or that that it's okay that if Ahmadis are being attacked, well, it's their own fault, because why do they say that they are Muslim? Let them just accept that they are minorities, and then they won't be attacked.
And when you say that there are certain groups within civil society who believe that, could you be more specific?
So I think that's again part of that confused narrative that I mentioned earlier. And I'll go back to the first Afghan war, where that is when you started having these slogans that became pervasive, that started becoming, like on the buses and graffiti on the walls. There was the slogan, Kafir, Kafir, Shia, Kafir. Shias are infidels. Shias are infidels. So who was it? Goebbels, who said that you repeat a lie enough and I will, get people to believe it. And that has been, out there in the public discourse constantly. There may have been intolerance, but it was to the level of maybe lack of understanding, or not really knowing what the other person does. I mean, but there were a lot of intermarriages. My parents, one is a Shia, one is a Sunni. There are people from Ahmadis who I know have so many friends whose parents are, one is Ahmadi, one is a mainstream Muslim. So there may have been intolerance in general, but it wasn't like that. No, I don't think it was.
Right.
And killing in the name of religion was not condoned. The religious extremists have built a narrative starting from that time of the first Afghan war with the military dictator Zia-ul Haq, propped up by America. Starting from that time, they have created and built and drummed a narrative in, which has been perpetuated through school textbooks, some of which were developed by the CIA in a university in the Midwest somewhere. I forget the name, but I mean, literally, the curriculum promoted the concept of jihad, of violent, of war.
University of Nebraska.
Was it Nebraska?
Yes.
And probably more. I mean, and then those textbooks are still in use, and they are in use not just in the madrasas, in the religious seminaries. They are in use in the so-called secular schools. So you've created generations of people who've grown up believing that India is the enemy, Hindus are evil, that anybody who's not a mainstream Muslim is, somebody that should be looked down upon. And yet, despite that, people are standing up against that narrative. And I think over the last maybe 10, 15 years particularly, I think with the internet has really helped people to question and to find answers when they question to these kind of situations, to this kind of narrative.
Right.
I'm sorry, just to very quickly, just to add that what civil society should be doing, I think what the government and what the security agencies, what everybody should be doing is that you call it as it is. If there's a criminal act, it's a criminal act. The rule of law needs to be imposed. You have to uphold the norms of justice and democracy, whether or not they are committed in the name of religion. That is the bottom line.
Right, absolutely. And you spoke about the rule of law and the sort of the primacy of that.
Yes.
In FATA, or in the tribal areas in Pakistan, it almost seems as if the Pakistani government's policy in terms of combating extremism or militancy there has either been military operations or drone strikes by the United States. Do you feel that is effective, and how has that undermined the rule of law? Because it does amount to extrajudicial killing. But that is something that I feel like a lot of in sort of general mainstream society in Pakistan, that's almost accepted as being okay and an effective way of combating militancy.
I don't think in the long run it's an effective way, because I don't think that the problem can be resolved by military means alone. But this is a war, and you have to strike back with, force. at people who are doing this. However, the people in the tribal areas have long been demanding rights as full citizens of Pakistan, which they have not been given. And the Pakistan government, subsequent governments, have not allowed them full status. As I mean, they're being governed by archaic British era laws still. And I think that is something that is keeping those areas undeveloped and backward and feeding this. But having said that, I think it's important to bust the myth that the militancy is coming only from the tribal areas. It's not. You know, you have people, you have your, you know, in southern Punjab there are local groups that were, you know, the groups that were that developed, that grew out of that whole ideology, that are functioning, and they're not tribal people, you know, or anything like that. And in fact, there are many people in the tribal areas who are fighting for education and for, you know, more rights and for, you know, against violence against women and all that, and they're finding very little support because of the stereotyping of tribals as being militants.
And sort of going, you know, sort of along with that, I remember when the Peshawar tragedy happened and there were so many protests, sort of, you know, it was so brutal, and, you know, so many children having been massacred that way, and there was, you know, there were voices from the tribal areas that came out and said, you know, when our children die because of drone strikes or because of military operations, our children who have nothing to do with militancy, there isn't such an outcry. So it's almost like what you said about, you know, when Shia mosques are targeted, or Ahmadi mosques or Christian churches, there isn't that level of outrage. And I feel that also perhaps applies to the tribal areas where mainstream Pakistani society perhaps doesn't really accept them as full citizens that need the full protection of the state.
Well, there's that, and there is also the fact that this is not the first time that children have been targeted. Do you remember that football field in Lucky Marwat in which I think 140 people were killed? But there are two aspects to that. One is that, or probably more, but a couple of things that I want to highlight in that. One is that the narrative is built through the mainstream media. That's one of the factors in building the mainstream narrative. The media is in the big cities. There were no media out in Lucky Marwat. We didn't see footage. We didn't get the stories. We didn't get those. That tragedy was not humanized to the extent that the Peshawar attack was. Secondly, they are quote unquote tribals. The children in the Peshawar school were children of middle class parents. Many of them children of army officers, teachers were army wives, and all of that. So that again brings me to what I was talking about, that narrative of the, you know, like you can, we won't take it that seriously unless you hit us, and us being the power holders in Pakistan, right? And so that is what then really. That's what I mean. I said across the board it has to be dealt with. And secondly, I don't even think that we should be treating it as I think we should treat criminals as criminals. These are murderers. These are cold-blooded murderers, and they need to be treated like that. I mean, you have the case of Mumtaz Qadri, who killed the governor of Punjab, Salman Taseer, who's been handed a death sentence, and then you have people arguing that his sentence should be mitigated, or because he killed in the name of religion. And I am personally not in favor of the death penalty, but I was glad to see that the Islamabad High Court upheld that death penalty, upheld it for certain reasons.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. You know, Mr. Ayir Rahman, the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, wrote about terrorism, and I quote him, the roots of terrorism in Pakistan are indigenous. They lie in the enormous work the state has done by its acts of omission and commission to eradicate the ideas of liberal Islam and facilitate the rise of obscurantists, leaving the entire area of intra-religious discourse open to exploiters of the faithful's vaguely understood beliefs. Pakistan will not be safe from terrorist depredations unless a crash program to build a tolerant, pluralist society is seriously executed. So you talked about the narrative, he spoke about the roots of terrorism. Again, I would ask you, so how can civil society groups, and when I say civil society, I mean the media, I mean non-government organizations, I mean religious networks. There's a whole range of organizations that sort of form civil society in Pakistan. How can they work together to reverse this narrative, counter it, and what role can they be playing?
I think people are already doing that with things like this movement that has come up to reclaim your mosque and to, demands to arrest Abdulaziz and the other people
and
who
for the benefit of our audience, could you say what this movement is about? Who started it?
So this started in December, right after the attack on the Peshawar school, when a lawyer from Karachi who happened to be in Islamabad, Gibran Nasir, who will be coming to the United States next in April, when he went and he led a protest in front of the Red Mosque in Islamabad, which is a kind of a den of of this kind of thinking, and the people affiliated with that Red Mosque have justified terrorist attacks, and they would refuse to condemn the Peshawar school attack. And so he led that demonstration there, and there were originally only 3 or 4, 5 people, and the next day there were like 300 or 400, and they kept protesting in front of that Red Mosque for days and days, and then they were threatened by the people in the Red Mosque, Abdulaziz being the lead cleric, who has since been removed from that position. He was paid by the government. He was a government servant, and he's been removed from that position now. But it kind of showed how the government has been financially supporting these people who are perpetuating that narrative, and that is the roots of terrorism that I.A. Rahman is talking about, who by the way is one of my gurus and heroes. He's an amazing person, and he politically he's always spot on. And so this reclaim your mosque and arrest Abdulaziz, and so this whole thing that grew up and grew out of that, the movement, it's that these vigils that we talked about at the start of this, they all grew out of that, and that is what that's one thing that the civil society needs to do, is to reclaim that space, make that noise, force the government to hold the perpetuators accountable, and steps are being already taken to revise the curriculum, the syllabus, to train police better, to take action, to move legally against people who are violating the law, that kind of thing. Those steps are taking place. So I think that I would say Pakistan is on the right track. A lot of things are happening, a lot of steps are being taken, and it's something that's, this is a mess that's taken, over 50, 60 years to make. It's not going to get cleared up overnight.
Right.
But for this, we need the support of the world, support for Pakistan's civil society, for the democratic political process in Pakistan, because it is a process. Democracy is not an event, it's a process.
Sure.
So it's not just one election, but this is the first time in 2013 that one elected government handed over power to the next. And I think we are starting to see the dividends of that, despite the government's, I think, weak-kneed response. And they're not as forthcoming on the issue and as decisive as we'd like them to be. But then it is a process, and I think they're moving in the right direction.
And so, talking about Gibran Nasir's movement, I mean, how big has it grown? How effective do you think it is, and how effective do you think it will be in sort of bringing about institutional change or compelling the government to come up with a strategy? I mean, so many people have died in Pakistan because of terrorist violence, and I think it was only last year in January that the government, the Nawaz Sharif government, came up with a strategy, a comprehensive strategy, the National Internal Security Plan, that sort of at least formulated ways to combat militancy. As far as I know, it has not yet been implemented. And I'm wondering how Gibran Nasir's movement or the Pakistani diaspora, how they could perhaps work together to compel the government to implement it and hold it accountable for not having done so thus far.
I think that strategy actually has already received setbacks because they've backtracked on a few of the original points, which have to do with reform, with the seminary reform part and other areas. And I think and Gibran himself is the first to say that it is not his movement, and he's not, it has to be spread out, and it has to be wide-based, broad-based. there is no name for this. It's a very amorphous sort of thing. Within it, there are many groups, and some of them have differences of opinion on how to deal with certain things. Some of them are more radical and very outspoken in blaming the army and the military establishment for the mess. And there are others who are saying that yes, they are responsible and all that, but this is not the time to come down hard on them, because now they are trying to change things, so we need to support them. Things aren't as black and white anymore.
Sure.
So there are a lot of different opinions, shades of opinion within this movement. And I think that it's broad-based in the sense that now you are having, it's growing. You have more and more people coming out, people who were not, in the past, when we, there would be just it would be the same faces at all the vigils, at all the protests. It would be the same, few, handful of people at all. Now you're having a lot of new people come in, a lot of young people coming in, a lot of older people also coming in, people who were not active before. I see civil servants, the bureaucracy, who traditionally have been very, very, they're not coming out openly, but they're forming, coalitions within themselves. They're finding like-minded bureaucrats within themselves, and they are working to strategize to, participate in this. So what Gibran has done is he has sparked off a kind of a I think his stand was a catalyst in mobilizing a lot of people who traditionally were not mobilized, and now they're coming forward. I don't know how big it is. I don't know how widespread it is. There's still a lot of counter narrative, what I call the dirty tricks brigade. If you I've written several articles about what I call the dirty tricks brigade. Some people, Kamran Shafi calls it the deep state. Some people call them the angels, because that's the term they've used for themselves. That they have in the past influenced the results of elections. They have subverted democracy. The intelligence agencies and the security establishment, they have pumped in millions of dollars into subverting the political process, the democratic political process in Pakistan. So I think that is also something. These are all, lots of factors, but things are not black and white anymore, and we need to, there's a lot of nuances in the situation. There's a lot of different factors, and we need to really keep our eye on the long-term goal, which is to end violence in any case, and particularly in the name of religion in Pakistan, because that is one of the main things, and to establish the rule of law and to act against terrorism. And I think one of the things that we need to do, and that the world needs to recognize and help Pakistan with, is to build the police force and at the community level, so that there's a lot of incidents at the local level of bullying in the name of religion. They'll black the women's faces from the billboards, they'll attack barbers who are shaving people, they'll attack DVDs that are selling, what they call porn, which may not be porn, but even if it is, that's vigilante action. And so that is what creates a kind of on the ground, a kind of a terrorism in the name of religion, and people intimidate people. And in the mosques you have them give sermons that justify the terrorists and that justify militant attacks. So there's a lot of things that need to be done.
Right, and so law enforcement needs to be strengthened at the local level so that they're able to nip that in the bud as it begins to grow. I just want to go back to that broad-based civil society movement, or the hope is that it will become more broad-based. And you said there are lots of different factions and lots of different groups who are part of that movement right now. And I'm wondering, how are most of the groups, in terms of what you know about it, are they mostly secular? Because what I found when I used to work in Pakistan and growing up in Pakistan, that even though we have a very vibrant civil society, there's a huge divide, a huge ideological divide within our civil society between religious, conservative groups, which are not at all violent, but they're just religious and they're conservative, and secular groups. And that divide and that gulf does not seem to bridge itself, or is not bridged, and which is why some of these movements, even though they begin with great gusto, don't always have impact, or as big an impact as we would like, because it doesn't sort of include all of the various groups that form our civil society, and that includes faith-based networks, say the Pakistani Ulama Council, or, because the religious organizations, especially the ones who are not militant and are not violent, they do have a large following and they have a large constituency. And so perhaps do you think that would be able to deepen the impact and broaden the impact of these movements?
I think that is happening now, and I think that's another of the plus points of this movement led by Gibran, because he is not coming at it from a quote-unquote secular, he is secular in the sense that he says separate state from religion, but he is not
anti-religion.
He's not anti-religion.
Right.
He's not. He's saying reclaim your mosque. He's not saying abandon your mosque.
Right.
He has gone out there, and he and his friends have gone and painted graffiti from the mosque. They've whitewashed, the terrorist. And they're saying that Islam is a religion of peace, and that resonates with a lot of people in Pakistan.
Sure.
With this attacks on the Imam Baras, on the Shia Imam Baras, you have the faith-based organizations, which are mostly Shia organizations, coming in, joining in, and so there are others also coming in and joining in. And I think there are many, like you said, faith-based organizations that don't support terrorism. People are just religious and conservative, and we're not saying to take that away from them. Nobody is saying that you should stop being religious or you should stop being conservative, but acknowledge that religion does not allow you to kill in its name, in the name of religion. And so I think that is where the line is drawn between those who are killing in the name of religion and those who say, no, wait a minute, not in our name. Our religion does not say this. So it is actually a fight within Islam right now, as people have pointed out. This is not a fight of the West versus the East, or the West versus Islam and Pakistan.
Right.
This is a fight that we are fighting, that within Islam, because the more Muslims have been killed by these extremists than any other community.
Sure.
Women, they attack women. They attack anybody who will challenge their narrow interpretation.
Sure, absolutely. So Beena, we're coming to the end of our program, but I did want to ask you about your initiative that you've been very active in and have, perhaps was also the founder of, which is Aman Ki Asha, and that's a Track 2 peace initiative between India and Pakistan. A lot of, the Pakistani state's policies are shaped by their, security concerns vis-a-vis India, and you've done a lot to sort of, at the societal level, to reduce some of the mutual misperceptions. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
Okay, so just to set the record straight, I didn't found Aman Ki Asha. I came into it after it had started. It was the Jung Group and the Times of India, the two largest media groups of India and Pakistan. It's an unprecedented cooperation between these two groups. And I came in there as an editor. And since I moved to the States a couple of years ago, I've been working online and producing the material, the content that's been published in Pakistan for this. And they've done a lot of events. We've done a lot of events bringing business people together, and that has helped to, I think, create a kind of get the governments to work towards signing certain agreements which were unthinkable before, like they're working to open branches of each other's banks in both countries. Right now there's no way to transfer money from India to Pakistan in a legal way, and so on. And so that's been going on, and we have a very active Facebook group, and there's a website. It's amankiasha.com.
And Aman Ki Asha translates into what?
Into the hope for peace. It's actually Aman in Urdu is hope and is peace, and Asha is the hope or the dream. So Aman Ki Asha is the hope for peace. And actually, I think that this particular piece of the puzzle is critical to Pakistan, because we need to reclaim our South Asian identity, our identity as people of the subcontinent, of the Indian subcontinent. We are not Middle Easterners. We are not, Arabs. Or Arabs, as they call them. We're not Arabs. We're not Middle Easterners. We are subcontinental people. We are people of the Indian subcontinent, South Asian people, and we need to reclaim that. And that is one more thing that I think will lead towards countering
The
this
narrative.
violent, that terrorism.
Absolutely. So what began as a civil society initiative between two media groups has actually had an impact at the institutional and at the government level, in that policies have been shaped by...
Influenced, I would say
by-
influenced. And it's still ongoing, but it's been 5 years, and I think that we've sparked off, it's catalyzed a lot more people from India and Pakistan, particularly young people, reaching out and initiating more people-to-people contact through debates and school exchanges and all kinds of things.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Beena,
Thank
for
you.
your time. You've given us so much to think about, and we applaud your effort and I wish you all success in the future. That's all for Critical Conversations. Until next time, this is your host, Mehlaka Samdani.